Not only did Randy Rhoads alter guitar playing, but he also changed the rules. I assumed he wouldn't be around for long when I first met him. I have no idea what, if anything, led me to think that. However, one of rock's most eerie tragedies marked the end of his meteoric rise. And more than 40 years later, fresh hypotheses and unsettling hints are finally completing the puzzle. Was it a tragic accident, a careless joyride, or something much more sinister? Because the new information goes beyond simply refuting the official narrative. It may show something more sinister. You already know that this story is more complex than the headlines if you're here. The rumors have reached you. You've witnessed the conjecture. We're now going into great detail about what actually transpired in Florida that morning and why so many people are still not persuaded that it was merely a freak crash. The collision that permanently altered rock. At precisely 10 in the morning. On March 19, 1982. The music industry would be rocked by the tragedy that broke out. Andrew Aycock, 36, was the pilot of a small Beechcraft Bonanza F-35 that crashed in Leesburg, Florida. Randy Rhoads, 25, a guitar virtuoso, and Rachel Youngblood, 58, a tour seamstress, were on board. It was only a 5-minute flight. The plane's wing clipped Ozzy Osbourne's tour bus before going out of control and crashing into a nearby garage and a pine tree in a terrifying series of events. All 3 passengers were instantly killed by the fiery explosion. One of rock's most promising and significant musicians lost their life in a heartbreaking way. That morning, the band had made a stop at Flying Baron Estates to repair the tour bus's malfunctioning air conditioner. They intended to take a brief break before moving on to their next performance. Instead, it served as the scene of one of rock's most notorious and enigmatic mishaps. Aycock, who was more than just the band's bus driver, was piloting the plane, which had been taken without permission. In addition, he was a licensed pilot with a medical expiration. The National Transportation Safety Board, or NTSB, said that poor decision-making was to blame for what transpired next. According to their report, Aycock had pranked the crew by taking the aircraft on a joyride and making several low passes over the sleeping tour bus. However, something went horribly wrong on the 3rd try. The bus's roof was clipped by the plane, leading to the shearing off of the left wing. As a result, the plane began to violently veer, nose first, into a nearby garage. On impact, it exploded. The area was consumed by fire. Keyboardist Don Air and bassist Rudy Sarzo were among the witnesses who would later characterize the scene as apocalyptic. It appeared to be a war zone, according to Sarzo. Parts of bodies were lying around. The skies were blackened by smoke. And the burning remnants of the house, the aircraft, and any chance of saving the people inside were in the center of it all. This is where the story becomes extremely unnerving, though. Official conclusions state that the incident was a careless stunt gone wrong. However, that version leaves out a number of strange, even terrifying, details that bandmates and witnesses have described. Numerous insiders have long maintained that the NTSB's explanation is incomplete. Don Air, who was outside the bus using a telephoto lens to take pictures of the plane, claimed that it was having trouble flying and wasn't just flying low. He said he saw a disturbance in the cockpit, the wings twitching wildly from side to side, and at one point, only 6 feet off the ground, the plane almost going diagonal. Air realized something was seriously amiss and stopped taking pictures just before the crash. It wasn't just him. The most eerie aspect? Randy Rhoads had no desire to be on that aircraft. For a long time, Randy detested flying. He stayed away from it at all costs. What made him say yes this time? Those close to Randy claimed that he only consented to fly in order to take some aerial photographs of the estate for his mother, who had consistently encouraged his musical endeavors. Nothing more than a calm flight was anticipated. Rachel was not without her doubts. She had disclosed her heart condition to Aycock. According to reports, Aycock pledged to go easy and avoid any unexpected drops or stunts. The ride around the property was supposed to be brief. Just a few circles in the sky, nothing dangerous. And yet, according to several insiders, the NTSB's version only touches the surface. What are they saying exactly? Randy Rhoads' last hours started off like any other tour day. a haze of journey, fatigue, and excitement for the next phase. On the evening of March 18, 1982, Ozzy Osbourne's band wrapped up a performance in Knoxville, Tennessee, and boarded their tour bus to start the overnight drive to their next stop. They were on their way to Orlando, Florida, when the bus's air conditioning system started to malfunction early on March 19. A brief detour to Flying Baron Estates in Leesburg, a private air park housing the bus company's headquarters, was decided upon. It was intended to be a standard pause, a time for upkeep and relaxation before continuing. Rather, it would serve as the setting for one of the most horrifying and puzzling tragedies in rock music. Baron Estates was not your typical neighborhood when it came to flying. Residents literally parked their planes in backyard hangars because the neighborhood was constructed around private runways. The band Groggy, who were on an overnight trip, parked the tour bus here while the majority of the crew slept. Andrew Aycock, a licensed pilot and the band's tour bus driver, made the decision to fly as dawn broke. A Beechcraft Bonanza F-35 was parked on the property, and Aycock had access to it even though he was neither scheduled nor authorized to fly. A series of choices that are still eerily inexplicable came next. Aycock left for his first joyride of the day at around 9 in the morning, joined by keyboardist Don Airey and tour manager Jake Duncan. Airey and Duncan described the atmosphere as playful. Aycock flew low, purposefully buzzed the bus to wake the crew members who were sleeping inside, and made a safe return. It was reported that the people below were amused by the stunt. One successful stunt, however, frequently leads to another, and this time the risk would be lethal, as is the case with many reckless thrills. Aycock invited Randy Rhoads and Rachel Youngblood, the band's 58-year-old seamstress, to the second flight. Both had a reputation for avoiding needless danger. Rachel had previously stated that she was reluctant to fly due to a heart condition. Randy also had a well-known fear of flying. He had frequently chosen to remain grounded rather than take short flights. However, on this specific morning, he consented to take some aerial pictures of the estate for his mother instead of pursuing an adrenaline rush. Aycock assured them of a peaceful flight once more. Just a few soft passes for a few pictures, no loops, no dives. It sounded innocuous. Just before 10 in the morning, the aircraft took off. And on-the-ground observers initially thought it would replicate the first flight's pattern. However, what transpired was far from ordinary. Don Airey saw right away that something was wrong while he was outside the bus taking pictures of the flight. He caught a strange commotion in the cockpit through his telephoto lens. More violently than before, the wings of the plane were swaying from side to side. It wasn't a joke. It appeared to be in a panic. Then catastrophe struck. The Beechcraft's left wing struck the bus's roof during the third low pass over it. The plane went into an uncontrollable spin after the impact tore the wing off the fuselage. It nosedived into a garage attached to a nearby mansion after colliding with a pine tree in a matter of seconds. It exploded instantly. The crash site was filled with black smoke and flames. A scene of unspeakable devastation greeted those who rushed from the bus to assist. No one survived. However, few people talk about this part. Originally, Randy wasn't meant to travel alone on that flight. Randy's close friend and bassist Rudy Sarzo, who plays for Ozzy, was also invited to go up that morning. Together, the two frequently engaged in sightseeing, late-night excursions, touring, and occasionally flying. However, Rudy declined on this specific day because he was exhausted and it was meant to be a day off. He declined the opportunity to accompany Randy for the first time. He would be plagued by that choice for the rest of his life. Rudy would subsequently claim that he only experienced exhaustion and no premonition. However, he avoided the flames because he made the impulsive decision to sleep in. He thinks that choice was made for him by fate. Moreover, in a cruel turn of events, his absence might have allowed Randy to board the flight, which he might not have otherwise done. Randy wasn't the only person who was on that plane, though. And Randy's fate might have been sealed by what saved Rudy Sarzo. Rudy Sarzo's haunting decision. The smallest decisions can occasionally have the most significant effects. More than 40 years later, one choice still has resonance for Rudy Sarzo, the bassist for Ozzy Osbourne and a close friend of Randy Rhoads. Rudy was offered a seat on a small plane that was taking off for a brief low pass around the tour bus on the morning of March 19, 1982. Ordinarily, he would have responded without hesitation in the affirmative. During the tour, he and Randy shared almost everything, including meals and impromptu excursions. Rudy, however, declined that morning for reasons he still finds difficult to articulate. The plan was to take the day off. After a lengthy run of performances and travel, he was exhausted. It felt natural to stay behind and get a few more hours of sleep. It was an uncommon indulgence at the time, but within an hour, that choice would become more significant than he could have ever dreamed. The plane he was invited to board, which was carrying Rachel Youngblood and Randy Rhoads, clipped the tour bus and then crashed in a fiery explosion. Rudy Sarzo was left behind, safe but broken, while the other three on board perished instantly. Rudy would talk candidly and frequently about the survivor's guilt that consumed him in the years that followed. He narrated how he woke up to the explosion, fled the bus, and saw his tour manager yelling, "They're gone. All of them are gone." Rudy initially had no idea who was on board. It felt like the air had been torn out of his lungs when he realized it had been his musical brother, Randy. That day, the turning point in my life, is when he called. And the grief has persisted no matter how much time has gone by. Rudy, however, doesn't think Randy's death was in vain. He claims that there is evidence that Randy acted in his last moments based on the trajectory of the collision. Rudy is certain that Randy may have saved everyone's lives by helping to divert the doomed plane from the tour bus. The bus roof was clipped by the Beechcraft's wing, but it did not crash into or penetrate it. Rudy thinks that if the plane had been even a few feet lower, it would have struck the bus's entire side and killed everyone on board. According to Randy, he saved us. I have complete faith in it. This belief is more than just a way to deal with emotions. It is based on the peculiar crash pattern. The bus sustained only minor damage. The impact wasn't fatal to the people sleeping inside, but it was high enough to tear off a wing. The image is eerie. Randy understood that the collision was unavoidable, attempting to steer the aircraft away from his fellow musicians. If accurate, it was his last act, a brave, selfless, and instinctive one. An unsettling visual detail provided by eyewitness Don Airy reinforces the notion that something was seriously amiss inside the aircraft. Airy had pulled out his camera and taken close-up pictures of the cockpit using a telephoto lens. What he witnessed was not a serene ride. There was mayhem. He explained how the aircraft wobbled as if it were being fought over, its wings tipping wildly. According to Airy, there was a struggle. There was something going on inside. Just before impact, the plane tipped to almost vertical. It was more than a poorly thought-out stunt. It appeared as though someone had lost control or was making a valiant effort to regain it. It begs disturbing questions. What went wrong on the second flight if a cock had already completed a perfectly round circuit earlier that morning? Randy had no desire to ascend. Rachel suffered from heart disease. It was said that the previous evening, a cock was having a party. And something went horribly wrong in that small cockpit. What caused the chaos in that cockpit, then, if ICOC had already flown once and Randy didn't want to? The hypothesis of Bob Daisley. Before former Ozzy Osbourne bassist Bob Daisley came forward with a theory that completely changed everything, the official narrative surrounding Randy Rhoads' death had largely remained uncontested in the decades since his passing. Daisley said pilot recklessness and cocaine-fueled bravado might not have been the cause of the crash. Rather, he thinks that something much more tragic and unpredictably caused the tragedy. In-flight heart attack. Rachel Youngblood, the band's adored seamstress and one of the 3 passengers on that fateful flight, suffered not just any heart attack, but a heart attack. When Daisley presented this theory on a Talk Louder podcast episode, it instantly caused a stir in the rock scene. He claimed that the Beechcraft Bonanza F-35 was a dual-control aircraft, which meant that the yoke and pedals were accessible from both front seats. Rachel's body weight might have put a lot of pressure on the controls if she had a heart attack and abruptly collapsed while sitting next to ACOC. The plane might have made an unplanned and fatal dive if she had stumped the rudder or yoke, even unintentionally. Once in a spin, the notorious V-tail design of the aircraft they were flying is notoriously hard to stabilize. According to Daisley, the pilot might not have been able to get better in time. And this is the tragic fact that backs up his theory. According to reports, Rachel refused to board that aircraft. She had been candid with the crew about her heart condition. That morning, she informed the cock that she wasn't feeling well and that she didn't think flying was a good idea. According to reports, a cock, who had previously taken Jake Duncan and Don Air on a low-key, showboating flight, promised to be gentle with her. He allegedly told her, just a calm loop or two, no stunts. She might have been persuaded that it was safe by his assurances and Randy's choice to fly up and take aerial photos. However, those brief moments in the air might have been too much. The autopsy showed that Rachel had in fact experienced a heart attack before the impact, according to Daisley. There was no rumor. It was a fact of medicine. If accurate, this minor but catastrophic incident might have produced a cockpit atmosphere that was impossible for any pilot, not even a sober and skilled one, to regulate. A cock, who was sitting next to her, might have overcorrected or panicked. Already, the plane was flying low, with limited space for altitude. Within seconds, the plane was descending in a spiral pattern, slamming into a nearby garage, clipping the bus, and striking a pine tree. Daisley's theory, however, raises issues even as it gives the narrative an unexpected and profoundly tragic dimension. First of all, it portrays Aycock as a victim of her circumstances rather than the careless villain that many people had thought him to be. That contradicts a large portion of the band members' testimonies, which characterize Aycock as unpredictable and potentially influenced by. The idea that Aycock was impaired at the time of the crash was supported by the FAA's toxicology report, which later verified that was discovered in his system. Then there is the issue of his past, which could alter our understanding of everything. In addition to being a bus driver, Andrew Aycock also worked as a pilot. 6 years prior, he had been a part of a fatal crash in the United Arab Emirates. Although there are still unknown details surrounding that incident, it is unsettling to learn that he had a previous death on his aviation record. The fact that he was not legally permitted to fly that day due to the expiration of his aviation medical certificate is even more concerning. Particularly when it came to passengers, he had no business operating the controls. However, there is a more sinister possibility that suggests this was not an accident at all. It also focuses on Aycock's history. Andrew Aycock was concealing what? The man at the heart of it all, Andrew Aycock, has remained a controversial and shadowy figure in the years following Randy Rhoads' untimely death. The pilot or bus driver is frequently relegated to a footnote in the official investigation. In the report, Aycock was much more than a name. Numerous theories concerning what actually transpired in the skies over Leesburg, Florida, on that March morning in 1982 have been stoked by his complicated and potentially troubling past. First, let's review the facts. Aycock was officially working as a tour bus driver for Ozzy Osbourne at the time of the accident, not as a pilot. But he was an experienced pilot. He had been a certified pilot for years, but he was legally prohibited from transporting passengers because his aviation medical certificate had expired. Even more concerning is the fact that Aycock was a part of a deadly collision 6 years prior in the United Arab Emirates. Information about that incident is still limited. However, the connection is unsettling. It is too unsettling to overlook the coincidence of two deadly aviation accidents that were connected by the same man but occurred at different times. What was the reason for his control of a private plane that morning? He had crew members on board, so why was he even permitted to fly? Reports state that he did not own the Beechcraft Bonanza F-35 ICOC flew. It was allegedly taken without the owner's consent and kept on the Flying Baron Estates airstrip. That alone suggests a careless sense of entitlement or possibly a lack of consideration for the repercussions. For those who knew him or saw his behavior that evening, poor judgment may not even come close to describing what the NTSB would later describe as his actions. Reports from toxicology showed something that seriously challenges the notion that this was a simple error. He had been under the influence of a cock when the collision occurred. Bob Daisley's theory that the flight was peaceful and well managed prior to Rachel Youngblood's purported heart attack is directly contradicted by this detail. According to witnesses, Aycock was partying all night prior to the collision, most likely using stimulants to get through the late hours. This presents a completely different picture if it is accurate. An image of a drunk man acting recklessly and treating a lethal machine like a toy. However, the darkness doesn't stop there. Of all the rumors that circulated in the aftermath, one was particularly unsettling and has never been proven false. Aycock's ex-wife was on the tour bus that morning, according to several sources. According to some reports, she even passes the car during the frequent flyovers of the aircraft. There has been conjecture that the dramatic low passes and stunts weren't merely performed for amusement or to rouse the crew. Were they meant for her specifically? Could this have been a planned outburst of anger masquerading as a botched stunt? There is an unanswered question. It was never Randy Rhoads' intention to quietly fade into rock history. His influence was instantaneous, and his rise had been swift. However, he was already imagining a life outside of the heavy metal spotlight by the time he boarded that fateful flight in March 1982. He was a student of the classical world and a budding composer in addition to being a rock guitarist. A dedicated musician who aimed for more than just notoriety. And in a cruel turn of events, everything came to an end just as he was getting ready to start a new chapter. Randy was reportedly getting ready to leave the touring lifestyle. Following the release of two groundbreaking albums, Diary of a Madman and Blizzard of Oz, with Ozzy Osbourne, he started telling friends and family that he wanted to return to school. Not for show. For branding purposes, no. For fervor. He intended to follow in his mother's footsteps as a student and teacher by enrolling in UCLA's master's program in classical music. Randy wanted to go back to what initially motivated him to pick up a guitar as a boy, so he dug into theory, composition, and performance. He had already asked questions. The university had even started talking to his mother. Randy wasn't making this up or dreaming. He was actually moving away from the touring lifestyle. This was neither a breakdown nor a burnout. It was a deliberate move in the direction of purity. He was a metal fan. He cherished Ozzy. Even more, though, he cherished music as a language. The loss was more than just a professional setback for Ozzy Osbourne. Randy was now the mainstay of his comeback as a solo artist. Many people actually attribute Ozzy's career survival after leaving Black Sabbath to Rhoads. His fusion of metal and classical music helped define a whole heavy music era. However, their bond extended beyond records and riffs. They were able to understand one another. They were mutually balancing. Ozzy was a mess. Randy was organized. Ozzy had a lot of energy. Randy was a quiet genius. I Am Ozzy, the Prince of Darkness autobiography, was unrestrained. Randy, he said, was a gift from God. He claimed that after Randy passed away, he nearly gave up music completely. It was paralyzing grief. Ozzy had lost a friend as well as a bandmate. A sibling, a soulmate. That's something else, Ozzy wrote, to get someone like Randy Rhoads to play on 2 albums, and for those 2 albums to sound as good as the day they were recorded. Where would that man be now? Only God knows. And the idea that torments fans the most is that one. What would have happened to Randy Rhoads? When he passed away, he was just 25. Hardly beginning to describe his brilliance. He continues to be cited as a major influence by musicians of all generations. Randy's name is revered by everyone from Tom Morello to Kirk Hammett, from Zakk Wylde to innumerable underground guitarists. It's also because of what he could have played, not just what he played. He never recorded the albums or wrote the solos. The pupils he never instructed. He had more than a promising future. It was dazzling. The music industry lamented his passing, but it was also plagued by the uncertainty that surrounded it. Why did Randy board that plane despite his fear of flying? Why was a private aircraft available to a bus driver who had a revoked license and in his system? Why wasn't it stopped? Why are there differing accounts of the last moments of the flight? Why do insiders, such as Bob Daisley, present theories that defy the official narrative? However, what if Randy wasn't simply lost to the music industry that day? But what if it also lost the truth? What actually took place that day? March 19, 1982, should have been a routine morning. A pause. To fix a bus and reassemble prior to the subsequent performance. Rather, it turned into one of the most contentious and gloomiest days in rock history. Randy Rhoads' passing was more than just a tragic event. Confusion, contradiction, and decades of unresolved questions surrounded it. And as the years pass, the mystery surrounding what actually transpired in that cockpit still plagues musicians, fans, and those who witnessed it. The story was broken right from the start. According to official reports, it was pilot error, the result of careless flying and bad judgment. The band's tour bus was buzzed several times in a private plane by Asiosi, the former bus driver who later became a pilot, allegedly as a prank to wake the crew members who were asleep. However, that version soon started to fall apart. Witnesses spoke of something more concerning. A plane that was swaying wildly, a potential fight in the cockpit, and actions that weren't consistent with a fun and safe ride. The band's keyboardist, Don Airy, had a camera outside the bus that morning. Moments before the crash were captured by his telephoto lens, and what he saw ran counter to the notion of a pilot in complete control. The wings swayed wildly. The aircraft nearly went vertical. There was frantic, unnerving movement inside the cockpit that suggested a struggle for control. The bus was clipped by the wing a few moments later. 3 people perished in a fireball that destroyed the plane and the dancers as it broke apart. Theories of conflict poured in. A prior fatal crash, Icox's history, a revoked aviation medical certificate, and his system were all cited by some. The medical condition of Rachel Youngblood was cited by others, such as former Australian bassist Bob Daisley, who suggested that she suffered a heart attack while in flight and unintentionally sent the dual-controlled aircraft into a dive. Even rumors circulated that Icox's ex-wife had been standing close to the bus and that the flybys might have been directed at her, transforming the collision into a possible act of reckless retaliation. These were not theories from tabloids. They originated from those who were close to the band and had experienced the fallout. But each version is pieced together from bits and pieces without the voices of Randy, Rachel, or Aycock. Autopsy reports, hazy pictures, half-remembered conversations, and memories tainted by trauma. And that might be the most annoying reality of all. Closure is never going to happen. No confession, no conclusive response, and no fresh proof. The only things left are the what-ifs. What if, rather than Randy, Rudy Sarzo had occupied the seat on that aircraft? What if Aycock had been prevented from taking off? What would have happened if the band had changed their plans or postponed their journey by just 1 hour? But what if Randy had refused? Following the incident, Ozzy Osbourne was devastated. The band was left to be held together by Sharon Osbourne. The crew had to relive the incident for reporters and investigators because they were overcome with grief and survivor's guilt. Randy's family suffered greatly. His siblings, his mother, and his pupils. The world lamented the passing of a budding artist who had yet to produce his best work. But Randy Rhoads was immortal even in death. In 2021, he was inducted posthumously into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. Aspiring musicians continue to study his guitar solos. Genres that didn't even exist during his lifetime bear his influence. But Randy left behind more than just sound, he left behind a mystery that might never be answered. One thing is certain, regardless of whether substance abuse, an unforeseen medical emergency, or something much darker caused the crash. That plane was not the right place for Randy Rhoads. In your opinion, what actually transpired with Randy Rhoads? Was it something more than a tragic accident? Leave your theories in the space provided below. If you thought this was intense, wait until you watch our next video. Remember to hit the bell, like, and subscribe because we have more untold stories from rock history that you won't want to miss. The darkness is even greater.